Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're really getting into just one source, an excerpt actually, that gives a fascinating look at Hebrews chapter 13. It focuses particularly on the life of love.
That's right. And our mission, so to speak, is to unpack the key themes and insights from this final chapter of Hebrews. We're exploring what this text says it means to live a Christian life that's really marked by love and, importantly, loyalty.
And the source material is helpful here. It lays out a clear path for us. It goes verse by verse through the chapter.
Yeah, and that's how we'll approach it too. It's a very practical chapter, really full of calls to action, how faith should look in daily life.
Okay.
And this analysis right away highlights a central theme for chapter 13. The Christian life fundamentally is meant to be a life of love.
Right. The life of love.
Right.
Let's dig into that. The analysis mentions a specific kind of love, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It points to the Hebrew word hesed. You often see it translated as loyal love or steadfast love or sometimes mercy in the Old Testament.
Exactly.
And in this context, the source explains it as a loyal, sometimes sacrificial, care specifically for fellow Christians. It's all rooted in that shared relationship they have through Jesus Christ.
And the analysis gives a reason why this hesed is emphasized right here, connecting it to the future.
Exactly. It suggests Paul is urging them, hold on to this. Because the journey ahead, walking the Christian walk, well, it's going to get tougher.
Okay.
And when things get tough, the analysis points out our fleshly instinct is to turn inward, protect ourselves.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the call here, mirroring Christ, is for selfless service, for that loyal care, especially when it's hard. It sort of goes against our default settings.
So this hesed, this dedicated care,
Yeah.
is it just for the people inside the faith community? Does the analysis limit it there?
No, interestingly. This is where verse 2 gets really intriguing. The analysis points out that this hesed, this loyal love, isn't meant to be just for believers you already know.
Okay.
It specifically calls for showing hospitality, being friendly, even to outsiders, strangers.
That's quite an expansion. And the analysis brings in that fascinating detail about angels.
It does. It draws on Old Testament examples, Abraham, Jacob, even Joshua. The analysis sort of floats the idea. Could God still send an angel disguised as an unknown person today? It's presented as a powerful reason why kindness to strangers matters. It might have a significance we don't even realize.
Then verse 3 shifts the focus again, highlighting another aspect of Histel, this time towards believers who are suffering.
Yeah, and this is maybe one of the most demanding parts. The analysis really stresses the instruction. Remember those in prison. Remember those being mistreated. As if you were right there with them, as if you were in prison too, actually undergoing their torture.
Wow, that's intense identification. The analysis pushes it even further.
It does. It poses the idea of being willing, hypothetically, to actually trade places with an imprisoned Christian to secure their freedom.
That level of commitment.
Yes. It suggests that willingness, that depth of solidarity, is what illustrates the kind of profound, he says, love being talked about here. It's way beyond just feeling sorry for someone. It's sharing the load.
Now, the chapter talks a lot about love and loyalty, but verse 4, according to the analysis, makes a clear distinction about marital love.
It does. It sets it apart while still affirming its high value.
Yeah.
It states plainly, marriage should be honored by everyone, and sex within marriage is pure, undefiled.
Okay.
This is contrasted with the broader hist for the community. It carves out a unique, honored space for the marriage relationship.
And right after affirming marriage, there's a pretty strong warning.
Oh, absolutely. The analysis underscores the text's direct warning. God will judge fornicators and adulterers, sexual immorality outside of that marital bond. It also touches on a kind of hierarchy presented in the source's view of the text. Marriage, the union of a man and woman created for each other, is second only to your individual relationship with God. It comes before even those close relationships with other believers.
So the bond between spouses is uniquely close.
That's the emphasis in this analysis, yes. You're united with your spouse in a way that's different from being part of the larger body of Christ, even with all the closeness that involves.
Okay, so if this chapter is about living a life of love, of hesed, the analysis points out a major obstacle or enemy to that love.
Right. In verses 5 and 6, this analysis labels the love of money as one of the biggest threats to living out this hesed love.
Why? What's the connection the analysis makes?
Well, first, it offers a false security, doesn't it? Money can easily become an idol, kind of subtly replacing our actual trust in God to provide.
Okay.
And maybe most practically, it can really hinder that sacrificial care and sharing. If you're worried about the cost, you might hesitate to help someone in need.
That makes sense. If security comes from what you own, you'll be reluctant to give it away. And the analysis contrasts this with the confidence we should have.
Exactly. It quotes that powerful promise from the text. God himself has said, "I will never fail you or abandon you." So the analysis encourages believers to lean into that promise, to confidently say, "Adonai is my helper. I won't be afraid. What can mere humans do to me?" That trust in God, it suggests, is what frees us up for generosity, for real He's.
Moving on, verses 7 and 8 shift focus slightly to remembering leaders.
Yes, the instruction is to remember those leaders who first brought God's message to them. And not just remember them, but look closely at how they lived, their way of life, and specifically imitate their trust in God.
And the analysis provides some context for why this was important then.
It does. It notes how difficult it was at that time to be openly Christian, to share your faith. These leaders did it anyway, the analysis says, because the gospel had truly changed their hearts.
Okay.
And right after that comes this really crucial reminder. Hold on to Jesus. He's unchanging, the same yesterday, today, and forever. Don't drift back towards the old covenant law.
Which leads directly into the warning in verses 9 and 10 about various strange teaching.
Right. The analysis interprets these strange teachings as attempts to mix parts of the old law, like rules about food, back into the picture, trying to add them onto God's grace.
And the analysis contrasts that with what really strengthens a person's heart.
It emphasizes that it's grace, God's unearned favor and power, that truly strengthens the heart. Not following these external rules or dietary laws. The analysis points out the text says focusing on these things, these foods, hasn't actually benefited people spiritually. And then comes that significant line about the altar.
Yes, we have an altar from which those who serve in the tent are not permitted to eat. What does the analysis make of that?
It digs into that. The interpretation offered is that our altar, as believers in Jesus, isn't a physical one tied to the old temple system. It's access to a heavenly reality.
Okay.
And based on that, the analysis draws a pretty stark conclusion. Those who insist on staying in the old ways, who reject Jesus, they have no right, no access to the blessings of this new heavenly altar. Essentially, in this view, no right to the kingdom of heaven.
So, according to this analysis, mixing law and grace for salvation, it just doesn't work. It's incompatible.
That's exactly the argument presented. It says adding any part of the law to grace means it stops being grace. Salvation, this analysis asserts very strongly, is only by grace through faith in what Jesus already did. Period.
And this idea of leaving the old system behind seems tightly connected to the next section about being loyal to Christ outside the camp.
It flows right into it. The analysis links Yazid that loyal love fundamentally to loyalty to Jesus Christ himself, not just to people, and certainly not to human religious systems or traditions.
The imagery used in verses 11 to 13 is really powerful.
It is. It draws from the Day of Atonement ritual. The analysis explains, the high priest took the animal's blood into the most holy place, but the animal's body, the sin offering, was burned outside the camp.
Right.
And the parallel drawn is that Jesus, our sacrifice, also suffered death outside the city gate, intentionally separate from the religious and political center to make people holy through his blood.
Which then leads to that challenging call for believers. Go out to him who is outside the camp and share his disgrace. What does that mean practically, according to the analysis?
Well, the analysis brings in the historical context again. Those first Hebrew believers, they were struggling. They wanted acceptance from the mainstream Jewish religious world, but they also wanted to follow Christ.
A difficult position.
Very. And the analysis suggests Paul is reminding them, look, Jesus himself was rejected, even killed, by those same religious leaders. If you truly follow him, expect the same treatment. Expect to be hated, rejected.
So the application for today, drawn by this analysis, is that following Jesus authentically might mean being rejected by established religious groups.
That's the parallel presented. If your primary loyalty is to Jesus Christ himself, not just a religious system, you might face opposition, maybe even hatred, from those systems. It mirrors what happened to Jesus.
The analysis also tackles the idea of incorporating Jewish practices into Christian faith today.
Yes, it basically says they do not fit. The interpretation given is that trusting Jesus' finished work alone for salvation is incompatible with trying to follow a religious system, especially parts of the old law, as a means of salvation. They're presented as mutually exclusive paths.
And the analysis uses some very strong language regarding one specific viewpoint.
It does, very strong. It addresses the idea that Jewish people who reject Jesus in this life might get another chance after death. The analysis calls that idea a lie straight out of the depths of hell, extremely direct.
Wow. How does it connect that strong stance back to Hesed, to loyal love?
It makes a challenging connection. It argues that real halaized, real loyal love isn't about being nice or telling people comfortable things. In this context, the analysis argues it means loving people enough to tell them the truth of the gospel, as this analysis interprets it.
Which is?
Specifically, that salvation comes only through accepting Jesus, and rejecting him leads to condemnation. The analysis admits this isn't popular today, but presents it as the clear, hard truth of the gospel.
Okay, shifting focus again with verse 14, the analysis talks about our ultimate citizenship.
Right. It brings up the idea that we have no permanent city here on earth.
Yeah.
It might mention Jerusalem as an example of contested earthly land, but the main point is...
our focus is elsewhere.
Exactly. Our focus, our seeking, should be on the one to come, the future heavenly city, the New Jerusalem. That's presented as the city that truly matters.
So if we're not focused on building something permanent here, how should we live now? The analysis talks about sacrifices we do offer.
Yes, verse 15 talks about offering a sacrifice of praise continually through Jesus. The analysis describes this not as a chore, but as the natural product of lips that acknowledge his name. Calls it the fruit of lips.
Like fruit naturally appearing on a healthy tree.
Precisely the analogy that the analysis uses. If your walk with God is healthy, praise will just naturally flow out of you through your words. And it adds, this praise isn't meant to be private, it's in the open. Acknowledging Christ publicly, not being a closet Christian. It connects this to the early disciples' boldness, even when facing persecution.
And praise isn't the only sacrifice mentioned in verse 16.
Correct. The analysis highlights doing good and sharing with others. These actions are also framed as sacrifices that please God.
Ah, okay.
And the analysis ties this right back to Hesed, that loyal love again. It suggests this willing, joyful service and generosity. It flows from a heart genuinely transformed by God's grace.
So it becomes a tangible way we show God's love to the world.
Through giving our time, our resources, our abilities. That's how the analysis puts it.
The chapter also gives instructions about leaders in verse 17.
Yes, a clear call to obey and submit to leaders. And the reason given is because they're watching over the believers' lives, and they have to give an account to God for that.
Okay.
So the text, as analyzed here, encourages believers make their job a joy, not a burden that makes them groan, because their groaning is of no advantage to you, the follower.
What makes a leader trustworthy, then, according to this analysis? Is it about credentials?
The analysis offers a specific take here. It says it's not mainly about, say, a seminary degree. The key is whether the leader's life demonstrates the things they teach. Specifically, do they show that he's love the chapter talks about? Does their walk match their talk?
And submission isn't blind following.
The analysis clarifies that. It's about respecting their position as being allowed or appointed by God. The view presented is, if God wanted them gone, he'd remove them. So you respect the role, assuming their life aligns with the faith they profess.
What if you don't have confidence in your leaders? What's the advice given?
It's pretty direct. Move on and trust that God will deal with them. The idea seems to be that staying and causing friction or groaning isn't helpful. If confidence is gone, perhaps find a different community and leave the judgment of that leader to God.
The author then includes a personal note about prayer.
Yeah, verses 18 and 19. The author, likely Paul, asks them directly, keep praying for us. And the analysis notes the reasons he gives. He's confident he has a clear conscience, wants to live honorably, and he specifically asks for prayer that God would make it possible for him to visit them sooner.
And then he prays for them, a really powerful prayer in verses 20 and 21.
It is. He recounts God's amazing power in raising Jesus, called the Great Shepherd here from the dead, all based on the blood of an eternal covenant.
And the request.
Based on that power, he asks that this same God would equip them with everything good they need to do his will. And more than just equipping, that God would work in them whatever pleases him, doing it all through Jesus Christ.
So equipping and God actively working within them.
Both, yes. And it wraps up with that classic doxology. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. Giving all the credit and honor back to God through Jesus.
Finally, the analysis just quickly covers the closing remarks in the last few verses.
Yeah, just to wrap up, the author asks them to bear with his message, calling it an exhortation, noting it was relatively brief. News about Timothy being released. Hope to bring Timothy along on a visit. Greetings to leaders and all the believers there. Greetings also from companions with him, identified as being from Italy. And the very final word, the blessing. Grace be with you all.
So, stepping back from the details, this deep dive, guided by our sources' analysis of Hebrews 13, really hammered home Hesed, that loyal, sacrificial love for believers, but also extending out to strangers, to the suffering.
And we saw how the love of money was identified as a key enemy, undermining trust and generosity. And that strong emphasis on loyalty to Christ alone, being willing to be outside the camp, outside systems that reject him.
Right. And that loyalty isn't passive. It shows itself through praise, through doing good, sharing what we have, and respecting leaders whose lives genuinely reflect this kind of love and faith.
And just to reiterate, this whole exploration was based solely on the analysis of Hebrews 13 provided in our source material today.
Yeah.
It paints a very clear and frankly challenging picture of loyal Christian living.
It definitely leaves you with a lot to think about. Maybe consider for yourself. What does living outside the camp with Christ look like in your own life right now? Where is that loyal Hesed love needed most? Even if, maybe especially if it feels unpopular or costly.